Hi, I'm Zach Waters, and welcome to another episode of WTF-STOP Photo Talk, where I chat to photographers about their life and connection to the world through photography. Diane Bush is an American activist artist photographer. Born in Buffalo, New York in 1968 at the age of 18, Bush moved to the United Kingdom, motivated in part by her response to the Vietnam War and a desire to immerse herself in a different social and artistic environment. This move would catalyse a significant period of creative exploration and social documentary work that shaped her career as a photographer. Bush's photographic practice in the UK began in the early 70s, which marked her entry to the Exit Photography Group, joining members Paul Trevor and Nicholas Batty, who were committed to long-form social conscious photography. Bush became the first woman to join the group, which we delved into in our chat.
In fact, I just came across the letter I got from, there's a Guildhall School of Drama. I went there. There was the St. Bartholomew's Hospital. I got a letter saying I could go in there and shoot. There was a boys' private school. There was a girls' private school. So, that was really fun, going into these establishments and having, the freedom to shoot, and I started to get off on the adrenaline, very much kind of like what Diane Arbus would talk about in terms of her, being in people's homes and having the permission to be there. It's like it's a passport,
After living in the UK for 10 years, working as a documentary photographer and in educational institutions, she returned to the US to attend her ailing parents. Bush's time photographing in England later led to a series of Cafe Royal books entitled The Brits in England, Even More Brits, On the Last of the Brits, as well as London East End. Her British documentary work is also held in several major institution collections, including the Tate, the V&A, and continues to be revisited in exhibitions and retrospectives. Once back in Buffalo, New York, she obtained her MA in photography from the State University of New York at Buffalo by documenting local boxing gyms and billiard halls. Subsequently, a 2024 Cafe Royal book, Main Street, Buffalo, New York, 1980 to 1981, was published. After graduating from university, she spent several years as a staff photographer at the local affiliate of the National Public Broadcasting and ABC stations. At the same time, she pursued self-imposed artistic projects and established a non-profit art organisation entitled Urban Art. In 2005, Bush published Warheads, which contains images that satirise America's new censorship of the Iraqi war. They were created by shooting TV surfaces with a macro lens at obtuse angles and throwing bleach on the resulting prints. And we went into a bit of detail on the making of Warheads in our chat.
What can I do? I realized at the same time that the Iraqi war started, so the CNN broadcasting was the first 24-hour news service in existence. And I got very excited because I thought, oh, great, I'm going to turn on the TV and we're going to see all this fighting right in front of our eyes like we did during Vietnam. And of course, I turned on the TV and everything was censored. You couldn't see anything. The only thing you could see were these talking heads, the people that were telling you what was going on.
Throughout her professional career, Diane has continued to exhibit her work in approximately 2 to 5 group shows per year and has been exhibited and published locally, nationally and internationally, including shows in Japan, China, Germany, Czechoslovakia, Spain, Britain, France, Switzerland and Italy. Since her relocation to Las Vegas in 1997, she has been awarded 15 grants and a fellowship from the Nevada Arts Council. She's also past president and director of the Contemporary Arts Center of Las Vegas. We had a wonderful and insightful chat about Diane's life and connection to the world through photography, and I'm really pleased she took the time to have a chat with me. We discussed how she met Paul Trevor and her involvement in the Exit Photography Group.
So I met Paul at the college. He had been working as an accountant, but he wanted to learn photography, so he took a class at the college. But of course, he had to pay for it himself. He didn't have an employer to pay for it. So I didn't see him that much, but he put a notice up in the college bulletin board or something saying, I'm looking for people to join me in this new venture. So I told him I was interested, and I worked with Paul and Alex and Nicholas
Batty,
Batty,
Alex Scott.
on the Down Wapping.
We chatted about the time she met Joseph Kudelka at the Lord's Mayor Show in London.
And I remember one time I was photographing the Lord Mayor's Parade, which is, an annual event in the city, and bumped into Joseph Kudelka, who was also photographing the parade the same day and time. And, I knew Joseph. So I bumped into him, and, the one thing that I remember is he was still kind of struggling then. So his glasses were all scotch taped together, because he couldn't afford, new glasses. But anyway, such a sweet man.
We also discussed her shyness when she was out on the street and how she overcome this and how she gained confidence as a street photographer getting out there and taking pictures.
So I quit my job.
Wow.
Started getting photographs, and, I remember some really bad days where I'd go out and never mustered the nerve to approach people and came back with nothing, and realized I just had to force myself to do it.
And we went into a little bit about the Exit Photographers Group's strategy of taking pictures when they were out on the street.
Shooting together. I mean, one of our trademarks was we would go down to a certain place, like Crystal Perkins and I went to some clubs in the city. I mean, we would work in pairs, and the beauty of that was that while one photographer is talking to your subject, the other photographer can take pictures. The person is distracted, so you can get all kinds of good, candid work. And that's how we were used to working in twos and threes.
So the day came for a chat, and I gave her a call, and I asked her what she was up to.
Well, actually, at the moment, I'm kind of involved in establishing my legacy. I'm in my 70s, so you have to think about it eventually. And I'm also downsizing, again, because I'm in my 70s, and going through a lot of old documents, getting rid of duplicates. I did manage to get some work in a permanent collection in my hometown of Buffalo, New York. And then I have some other bodies of work, and I'm looking for institutions that will, be willing to house and take care of some of these other, bodies of work, the negatives and whatever prints I have. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now. I'm between big art projects, and I'm taking care of the paperwork.
You've had a really interesting journey as a photographer, haven't you? What would you call yourself now? Are you're an artist, a multimedia, mixed media artist as well? Now, I presume is that what you sort of class yourself as now?
Yeah, in terms of media, and in terms of intent, I think of myself as an activist artist. We used to call ourselves concerned photographers, but that doesn't ring a bell in a modern lingo. So now we're called activist artists.
Yeah, you're quite a documentarian, aren't you, as well? Documentary features in your work in a sense of current affairs and issues and life with your Bush stuff, I've noticed. But your installations and your work from the Iraq War warheads and things, you're very into current issues. Tell me a little bit more about your current artwork and the stuff you're working on. What have you been?
Okay. In terms of, you are right, originally I think of myself now as a multimedia artist. I started out drawing and painting, but in my teen years, but I got really bored with that fast because, it sounds like bragging, but it wasn't enough of a challenge for me. And when I discovered that you could use a camera to express yourself, I really latched on to photography because it just was more challenging. I'm not a scientific thinker at all. So learning the science and the math was kind of exciting for me. It was like a brand new world. So, but now I'm using lots of different materials. I do a lot of fiber art, and my last big project was using toy soldiers stuck on a big red medicine ball, red toy soldiers on the red medicine ball, and made it look like a COVID molecule. And the soldiers were bunched into little groups of 3s and 4s, and they're all fighting each other. And, that's all about this mask anger. It's called toxic masculinity, a bitter pill, because the sphere, the ball, is a medicine ball. So there's some puns and some, I just got angry with people. I mean, in the States, there've actually been murders over masks. So it can be serious.
You can see that in Warheads, your sort of frustration and anger at these people. For those of you who don't know what Warheads is, would you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So I used a macro lens to held at an oblique angle and a wide aperture to get distortion when photographing the talking heads that we saw on TV. So you have to sort of, let me go back a few steps here. I grew up in the 60s, and I remember sitting around the dinner table, eating my dinner, watching reporters following soldiers through the Vietnam jungles as bullets whizzed over their heads. I mean, we were fed every day this close, reporting on TV. And of course, that spurred a lot of the anti-war movement that I was involved in. And so when the Iraq war happened, I was so incredulous that we were entering another war. I really felt I had to do something. And if you're a photographer, you think, well, I have to go to the front and photograph. But then, of course, the very next split second, you realize, I can't do that. And I was, of course, in the middle of teaching a semester. I was teaching photography. So I thought, well, what can I do? I realized at the same time that the Iraqi war started, so the CNN broadcasting was the first 24-hour news service in existence. And I got very excited because I thought, oh, great, I'm going to turn on the TV and we're going to see all this fighting right in front of our eyes like we did during Vietnam. And of course, I turned on the TV and everything was censored. You couldn't see anything. The only thing you could see were these talking heads, the people that were telling you what was going on. The censorship really made me very angry because, we're supposed to have free speech in this country. And that's what started me off thinking, well, I have to photograph the war. I can't go there. But instead, what I did was during the Gulf War, I just got in front of the TV and shot every day. So the Gulf War was 43 days, and I know that because I was on my knees in front of the TV for 43 days shooting the talking heads. And then what happened was for the Iraq War, that was the Gulf War. Then the Iraq War happened. I got even angrier because I knew that this was going to go on for about 10 or 20 years. And we were really going to go in and mess things up. So I wanted to leave the country. I saw what was coming. But my husband was not interested in uprooting. So I said, well, if I'm not going to leave the country, I have to make art. I didn't really see the sense of reshooting what I'd shot already. Instead, I thought, well, I'll take those images and I will somehow add something that connotates violence. So I got some razor blades and I I started scratching the surface of the print. I tried ripping the prints. Nothing was working out visually. And then I remembered using potassium ferrocyanide in the dark room with my black and white work. I thought, what happens if I throw bleach these prints? And I'd never worked with color prints before. And that's what I had to work with, is these color prints from the Gulf War. So I tried throwing bleach on the print. And what happened was where the bleach hit the print, the result were, as the bleach ate into the emulsion layers of a C print, because these were C prints, what ended up was the same colors as fire. I mean, that's totally random, right? So where I threw the bleach, I was getting reds, oranges, yellows, and whites. And there was my violence. There was the visual violence. So what I loved about the whole process was that it was random. Throwing the bleach on a C print was random. I had no idea what the result was going to be. I had to have lots of prints. I had to do lots of, variations. I had to wash off the bleach before it went white. I wanted the colors. So it was fun. It was exciting, and it showed the violence. So what you end up with is a picture of somebody on TV, and it looks like they're on fire. And the contrast between somebody in a safe TV studio and this violent fire graphic was what I was trying to portray. And it worked.
The work really interesting is the grid system, the way you displayed them. They're very psychedelic. It's a bit of a trip, isn't it? Looking at them, they're really sort of playing in a sort of psychedelic and almost sinister way, aren't they? The visuals, they're coming across as quite evil in a sense, these people on the screen. Do you get that as well? Or is that what you're trying to portray?
Well, what worked really well is that I was working with an old-fashioned curved TV screen. So when I used the macro lens at an angle, it distorted the face. And none of this is done digitally. It's all done manually. And then because the aperture was at its widest setting, you get a thin area where the pixels of the TV screen, which you can't even get anymore on a modern high definition screen, but you see the pixels up close, in their red, green, and yellow, formation. So there's lots of things going on.
Do you remember Max Headroom?
Oh, yeah.
It's a very similar finished style to that sort of thing, isn't it? It's very robotic. Oh, I love it. I think it's a really great concept, actually. You're still breaking images. You're still doing stuff. You've got some great projects. What I want to do is go right back to Buffalo, New York. I want to go back to the beginning. I would like to know how your world from Buffalo connected to the photography world and where that journey took you. I'm fascinated by your journey in England, your involvement with the Exit Photography Collective, how your time in England was spent and how you took that to the next step when you moved back to the States, and looking back on, reflecting on that time and what you took from it. Tell me about the pictures, and I'd like to hear that. And I'd like you to just go back now to New York.
I guess the largest influence on me was I have an older brother who's an artist. He's also, he's a pretty remarkable guy and very charismatic. He excelled in art and math and philosophy and wrestling. And he was the sweetest older brother you could ever have if you're a little girl. So I was pretty enamored with him. He was a huge influence on me. And during the Vietnam War, he was the head of the local chapter of a group called Youth Against War and Fascism, a very kind of strict Marxist group. But it was a national group. He was the local head of that group. He was so charismatic that when he wanted to enlist in the army, they wouldn't let him in. Of course, his aim was to infiltrate from within, and they knew that. But he was he still is. He's a great artist. it seemed like the only real natural skill I had was in the arts. I kind of knew that from day one. So he got me started, and I also had an aunt in New York City. My dad comes from Brooklyn, so he has family, and he had family in New York City, and I had an aunt who was an art teacher. And whenever I was in New York City, because we were only 8 hours away from New York City, so we would drive, the family would go into New York, or later I'd fly. But she would, of course, drag me to every art museum and every gallery in New York. So she was an influence as well. So that's how I got involved in the arts. Well, I started drawing from probably age 3, and then I kept drawing, and I was still drawing and painting in high school. But then what happened was I had my first trip away from home to see a girlfriend in Florida. And of course, when you go on a trip, you're supposed to take a camera with you. And so somebody gave me a camera to take. It was, I don't know what it was, but I put the camera up to my eye and realized, hey, wait a minute, I can do other things than just take snapshots. So that was kind of the first awakening I had that photography could be used as an art form. But it wasn't until I met my future husband that when as recorded, he taught me how to use an SLR. That was just the start of a long career. I mean, I pretty abruptly gave up the drawing and painting for the camera. I have another older brother who avoided the Vietnam draft by going into the Peace Corps. I guess are you familiar with the Peace Corps?
I've heard of the Peace Corps, yeah. I've actually worked with the American Peace Corps in Cambodia.
Oh, okay. So anyway, my other older brother, Ron, went to the Peace Corps, and to avoid the Vietnam War draft, he came back after 2 stints. After 2 stints, you can't do a third. You can do 2 stints. Each stint is 4 years. No, each stint is 2 years long. So he did 4 years, and then he came back to the States, and he brought with him a friend of his who was in the Peace Corps, and they got an apartment together back in Buffalo after they came back from Africa. They were in Ghana, and this friend of his, took a shine to me. And I was 17 at the time. He was about 23 or 24, so he was a older man as far as I was concerned. I was still in high school, but he took a shine to me and started to court me with my parents, permission and knowledge. Just, basically going to concerts, I mean classical philharmonic stuff. But he showed me how to use an SLR. What happened was, as the relationship grew, so did the draft board's interest in him. Eventually, he had 2 draft boards fighting over him, one in California, one in Buffalo. And by the time he had to leave the country to avoid service, I was in university, my first year of university. So the day after I finished my exams in December of '69, we left the country illegally, took a flight from Toronto to London. And the reason we were going to London, because a lot of draft dodgers, of course, went to Canada, but the reason we were going to London is because my husband and my older brother, Ron, both had met these 2 Englishmen in Africa. So these Englishmen were looking for a rare species of frog in the desert. And I guess they actually found it. But anyway, this English connection gave us somewhere to stay when we were in London. And we ended up staying with the Ken Livingston and his family in West Norwood.
That's West London, yeah.
Yeah, Red Ken and his whole family put us up. So it was quite an experience. It was winter. There was no central heating in the house because London had gone smokeless. And you just had that little electric bar And I don't think I slept for the first several months because I was so cold.
It must have been quite a culture shock come over. It was quite a big thing then.
Well, I was very happy to get away from my folks because they were very overprotective. So that was the other element that spurred me on to leave. And you know, there was an ocean between us after I landed in the UK, and I knew they weren't going to cross it. So I was safe. I was really interested in my independence. So it was perfect for me. I didn't really want to get married that young. I had saw myself as a very independent young woman, but at the same time, I had to be married in order for the work permits and visas and everything to work in our favor. So we got married probably, I don't know, maybe a couple months before we left. That way we could stay in England because my husband had his degree in geology. He ended up getting a job in King's College on the Strand doing biological research for the college. And then his work, because he had a work permit, I was able to get a work permit because I was there anyway. They might as well put me to work, right? But we had to leave the country for a month because, as you know, you can't enter the country without a work permit. He, it's against the law, but he did look for work while we were there on a visitor's visa. Then we left the country and stayed in Paris for a month, living on bread and cheese and cheap wine while we waited for the work permits to arrive in Paris. And fortunately, they arrived. After a month of just eating bread and cheese, I had a hot meal.
I presume when you came over with your camera.
My husband had a camera. I did not have one at that time, but later I had my own camera, and then we added different lenses to our arsenal. And it was funny because when we finally split up as a couple 4 years later, all I asked for was the 135 millimeter lens, the 28 millimeter lens, and the macro lens, and a camera body, and that's all I wanted out of the relationship.
At what point did you sort of start thinking, I'm going to get out on the streets here and start taking pictures? Because it began a really long journey for you, didn't it?
Yeah, well, I blame Paul Trevor, who was basically the instigator of the Exit Photography Collective. I had been previously trying to emulate photographers like Ralph Gibson. I really liked his style. I'd been reading Creative Camera and studying other photographers. And I just liked Ralph Gibson's sense of composition. And so most of my photographs were architectural studies and shadows and, things that didn't really involve confronting other people. I was very young. I was very shy, and I had very little self-confidence.
How did you meet Paul Trevor?
My first job in the UK was at the London College of Printing. I was a file clerk, but I was terrible at it. So as soon as I got my work permit, I think I was there for a month, I looked for something else, and I discovered there was a job for a photographic technician at the Paddington Technical College, which was up on Edgware Road. My husband and I had built a dark room in our kitchen, and we had been going to camera club meetings, and we had been experimenting with all the different fancy techniques you can do in the dark room. So I had built up a little portfolio, and I marched off to this job interview and showed them my portfolio, and they said, "Yep, you're our person." So I was working as a photographic technician at the college, and we were serving students who were in the day release program, where one day a week your employer would release you to further your education. And we were teaching two different classes. I think one was a studio photography, and the other one I think was a more scientific photography class. But, I was handing out lenses and mixing chemistry and testing chemicals, things like that. So I met Paul at the college. He had been working as an accountant, but he wanted to learn photography, so he took a class at the college. But of course, he had to pay for it himself. He didn't have an employer to pay for it. So I didn't see him that much, but he put a notice up in the college bulletin board or something saying, I'm looking for people to join me in this new venture. So I told him I was interested, and I worked with Paul and Alex and Nicholas
Batty, Alex Scott.
on the downwapping project. But if you look at the downwapping book, you'll see these architectural studies. Obviously, those were mine, and I didn't do a lot of the people shooting. So what happened was when we started our second project, which was about the city of London, just the area within the walled city, Paul basically said to me, if you don't shoot photographs of people, we're not going to use you anymore. So he left, and then Chris Steele Perkins joined.
That's right, yeah.
And we started shooting this project, which Paul was confident we'd find the funding for it, but we never did. And what happened to me was I was trying to get photographs of people on the weekends, but if you go down to the city of London on the weekend, it's completely deserted. I mean, it's the financial section of London, so no one's going to be there on a Saturday or Sunday. So I was having a lot of trouble. So I quit my job.
Wow.
Started getting photographs, and I remember some really bad days where I'd go out and never mustered the nerve to approach people and came back with nothing, and realized I just had to force myself to do it. That was 1974.
Yeah. So where were you in the group then? Were you still working?
Yeah, I was still working when we did downwapping.
Yeah.
And then when we started the city, that's when I realized I couldn't do both.
You're right.
So my husband and I realized we could manage with just his salary. So I quit. I quit the Paddington Technical College job, which really upset my father a little bit. But that's okay. It's funny. He would write me letters. I just came across some old letters. He would write me letters saying, can you really make a living in photography? Cindy Sherman is a millionaire, but, he just wasn't sure.
Just trying to put it in some order so I can follow it. Then Chris Steele Perkins came in. That's when they did the survival programs around the country, isn't it? That was later on, yeah.
Yeah. So what happened was I was shooting all these photographs for the city project, and that's what you'll see in volume 1 through 4 of the Cafe Royal books that are published. Those are mostly photographs I took for that city project, but the city project was canceled.
Yeah.
We never found the funding. Paul didn't shoot that much because he was building a darkroom. Nicholas was busy writing the grant for the survival program project. The city project was basically just canceled.
Shooting what we now call Brits, England, more Brits, even more Brits, and the land of the Brits, as your 4 now Cafe Royal books you have, which features all or most a selection of the black and white work you did. What was it like doing it then? What was the feel like? How did you sort of fit in and around? Were you searching for something because you're still an American in London and you're a young lady? And what were you looking for?
Well, I was, basically I kind of looked at it as being on assignment. I was on assignment for Exit, and if they wanted people pictures, I'll get them people pictures, because I knew that Exit was important. It was important to me. And through my work with Exit, I was recognized as, a woman photographer in London that had something to contribute. So it was through my involvement with Exit that I was invited to participate in a women's photography group that was working with the Half Moon photography workshop and gallery. And I contributed work for two of their shows, one called Women, that was all by women photographers, and then another show called Men, photographs by women. So I knew Exit was important. And, having shown the downlopping work at the Photographers Gallery in London, that was huge, right? Even though it was in the smaller gallery, we got reviews in the British Journal of Photography. I have photographs printed in Spare Rib magazine, reviewing the women's shows. So there was some decent press, both in the Daily Telegraph. And so, I knew Exit was something very special, and I wanted to fulfill the assignment. So if I had to make myself uncomfortable and be frightened out of my wits about approaching a stranger, that's what I had to do.
You got involved with lots of different things, didn't you? You were following pensioners around and organised trips. You were just wandering the streets, meeting people and going to pubs and finding kids down back alleys and stuff like that. You must have really wandered. Where was your geographics on that? Where were you wandering specifically?
So, Paul had printed out a huge list of everything within the city walls of the city of London.
So in that sort of ring of city, the financial part, yeah? Yeah.
I mean,
gotcha.
There's that historical city of London boundary, and it was anything within those walls. And so, I had, in fact, I just came across the letter I got from, there's a Guildhall School of Drama. I went there. There was the St. Bartholomew's Hospital. I got a letter saying I could go in there and shoot. There was a boys' private school. There was a girls' private school. So, that was really fun, going into these establishments and having, the freedom to shoot. And I started to get off on the adrenaline, very much kind of like what Diane Arbus would talk about in terms of her, being in people's homes and having the permission to be there. It's like, it's a passport, to be in places that you normally wouldn't be in. And it can be very exciting.
Yeah, you must have been quite a novelty, wouldn't it? Being the American female walking around.
Well, and then the other part that's pretty interesting is that people did not see me as a threat in the sense that they might see a man with a camera as a threat. And sometimes I would just totally lie and say, oh, I'm just doing this for student. I'm a student, and I'm just shooting an assignment for my student work. But yeah, I had a huge afro. I dressed like a hippie. They twigged I was not English when they heard me speak. So I had a little bit of an English accent by then, but it was never 100%.
What did you go to lens-wise?
So I started out with the 35, but I really loved the 28. I rarely use the telephoto because you're not close to your subject, but, sometimes I did have to use the 135. And I remember one time I was photographing the Lord Mayor's Parade, which is, an annual event in the city, and bumped into Joseph Kudelka, who was also photographing the parade the same day and time. And, I knew Joseph. So I bumped into him, and, the one thing that I remember is he was still kind of struggling then. So his glasses were all scotch taped together because he couldn't afford new glasses. But anyway, such a sweet man. It was fun.
What film were you using?
Oh, so I was usually shooting Tri-X or Ilford 400, and I would push it when I needed to 800 and develop in microfilm.
Yeah, HP5.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting talking to other photographers from that period. It was HP5 28mm lens. I loved 28 and 35 for prime lens documentary work. It's wonderful. It just takes you, it helps your eye see what else is going on, and it brings in other things to play with what you're focusing on.
Well, you need a wide angle lens because our vision, is horizontal. We've got two eyes side by side. So you need a wide angle lens to look a little bit more realistic. I mean, I tried the 24, but it was too wide. It was too distorting.
Yeah. And you don't realize how close you have to get as well with the 24 if you want to get near people. Did you know you were sort of creating a piece of history there with the work?
Well, I'd always hoped that, if I'm not recognized at the time that, maybe, in 50 years, the work will be looked at as valuable. And if not valuable, then people who just want a nostalgic look back will find value in it.
What happened after the exit group? Then you shot the pictures. Then what happened from working? Yeah, but you stayed friends with Paul Trevor, the guys. But then you moved from that to when you went home, packed up your negatives, and went back to America. Is there a bit in between there? Were you continuing to take pictures?
Oh, yeah. So what happened was, the city project was canceled, and Exit got a grant from the Gulbenkian Foundation to shoot survival programs. And basically Exit photographers, instead of shooting together, I mean, one of our trademarks was we would go down to a certain place, like Crystal Perkins and I went to some clubs in the city. I mean, we would work in pairs. And the beauty of that was that while one photographer is talking to your subject, the other photographer can take pictures. The person is distracted, so you can get all kinds of good, candid work. And that's how we were used to working in 2s and 3s. Well, with survival programs, the idea was that we were all going to split up and go to the worst slums imaginable across the United Kingdom. And I said, well, screw that. I'm going to get raped. There's no way I'm going to go by myself to, these really horrible slums with a camera, no matter how much black tape I smother it in to make it look like a piece of crap. I'm going to get raped. And I just said, well, I have to leave the group. It's not something I'm willing to do. So, they weren't going to provide security for me. I left Exit. I started a kind of Exit-like group of my own called Reflect, because now I was living in Manchester. So the other thing that happened was, despite my breakup with husband number one, he had moved to Stirling University in Scotland and decided we should try to patch up the marriage. And I thought, well, I took that vow, let's give it a shot. And I wasn't, in Exit anymore. I'll go up to Scotland. And that only lasted a month. So I was headed back down to London because I didn't know what else to do, and stopped by to see a girlfriend I knew from the London Labour Party. She was living in Cheshire. So I stopped to see her. And she said, oh, why don't you stay here? And she had the room. Maybe you can get a job in Manchester. So that's what I did. I ended up in Manchester. I was there for about 4 years there, and then in Hebden Bridge in West Yorkshire, commuting into Manchester for work, and started a group called Reflex. And that's where I met Aileen Faraday, another important photographer.
Yeah. How was the picture taking then? What were you focusing on in Manchester, picture-wise?
So I actually got a small grant from the Yorkshire Arts Council to do a project on mill life I'm talking like 150 pounds maybe. And then I was also doing a project on all the different co-ops in Manchester, because there was a food co-op, there was a book co-op, there were little food co-ops and here and there, and it was kind of a thing. So, I started a few things, but nothing really culminated in something solid. But I had a lot of photos along the way, and I was still shooting. While I was up in Manchester, I was still shooting for both the women's show and the men's show in London. So I would commute down to London and meet with those people. And those photographs are sprinkled in the Brits books.
How was the work being exhibited at the time?
Well, I actually started the first photographic gallery in Manchester. It was I was working at a radical bookstore called Grassroots in Manchester, and I convinced them to give me a wall for a photographic gallery. And there might have been about 10 different shows there, starting with my work. And then I also showed my women photographs at the Royal Manchester Infirmary. They had an art program.
It's interesting period, isn't it? That when you're looking back at that time, we just had a free rein then. We could just wander and do things, and there wasn't the restrictions now. There is, when you're walking around and meeting people were less suspicious of you, weren't they then? It was much more of a community. Did you find this when you started around the London period? Like I said before, you must have been quite a novelty having this American girl here. They've probably only really seen Americans on the films, most of these sort of teenagers. And did you find that was an advantage for you when you were shooting? And did you feel any hostility in a sense? Did you ever feel like you shouldn't be there? Because it must have been a real new world to you, wasn't it? Was that also part of the focus and the intrigue to find out more about British culture?
Well, that just happens. Finding out about British culture just happens by being there for 10 years. But, again, like I said, I wasn't seen as a threat. I was only in my 20s. I was a young girl. And the other thing is that there weren't that many women photographers because SLRs were expensive back then. I couldn't afford one on my own. I mean, the only reason I had an SLR was because, my husband had the buying power. And so as a group, the women photographers were small. There really weren't that many of us back then.
Who were your heroes then? Who were looking back, really influenced your documentary taking?
Well, I just loved looking at, people like Bruce Davidson, Man Ray for his compositions, Robert Frank, The Americans was mind-boggling, Margaret Bourke-White, Eugene Smith, the series on the mercury poisoning in Japan, Bill Owen, Suburbia. I saw an amazing show by Louis Hine at the Photographer's Gallery, and the prints were probably 2 by 3 inches. But, they were just so inspiring. But, I followed Creative Camera, British Journal Photography, Bill Brandt, of course. There weren't that many people shooting in color that I was interested in at that time. But, of course, that changed.
London must have been a really interesting time to be out there and your other photographers, friends and stuff, because there was a lot happening with photographers, wasn't there, in London?
Well, of course, I traveled in a very, very small circle of photographers that had no money. People talk to me about London in the 60s, but I think I went down to Carnaby Street once just to look at it. I went into Biba's once just to look at it, but I would never have dreamt of spending money on clothes and things because I didn't have it, especially after I quit my job and was a single woman again. Swinging London, I knew it was there, but I didn't partake. I think I went to one movie. I think I saw one musical. That was it for, over 10 years, which is crazy. And we didn't have a TV, never had a TV. So I didn't learn about Monty Python until I came back to the States, which is crazy, right? I mean, I would go to work and people would say, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, and I have no idea what they're talking about.
So at some point, you packed up your negatives and you went back to America.
Yeah.
What was your journey then? How did Cafe World Books come about?
So basically, I got to a point after 10 years where I wasn't happy with my job. I actually got another college technician job in Salford, outside of Manchester. I think it was the Salford College of Technology, whatever. It's like you can't go home again. It wasn't the same. Didn't like the people I was working with. Didn't have a boyfriend that meant that much to me. And at the same time, I found out that my mother was having health problems. So I said to myself, well, I could go back and help out my mom, come back to England. Maybe I can make some money in the States and I come back to England, buy a little cottage or something. That was kind of the thought. That's what I did. But I didn't come back to England. I never managed to do it because in order to keep my residency in England current, I had to return to England like every 2 to 4 years, and I just couldn't afford the transatlantic fare, especially once I started going back to school in the States and I was a student. So I just had to let the residency fall to the side. And it was huge. Going back to the States was almost as painful as going to England. It was a huge culture shock. I had no idea what anybody was talking about. If they talked about politics, I didn't understand what they were talking about. They talked about movies and TV. I had no idea what they were talking about. I was lost. So it took me 2 years to get my feet back, so to speak.
So you got a culture shock going back to America?
Oh, it's terrible. Terrible.
Wow, that's interesting.
And the worst part was the politics. All my friends had fallen into a Reagan Me Too, not Me Too, me, just like the me generation.
Yeah.
Me. I just found it very selfish and I was kind of horrified. No one wanted to, if there was any reminder of Vietnam or the war, that was a taboo. So anybody who looked like a hippie or, was stuck in the 60s, that was evil, bad medicine. I was pretty sad when I came back and found out what had happened, socially, politically.
You continued your photography education when you came back, did a master's?
Yeah. So what happened was I got back to Buffalo, and showed my work around. This is all the Brits stuff, the black and white Brits. Some people loved it. The people in the arts hated it. It reminded them of the 60s. So what happened was I showed my work and some people liked it, and I got a little show at the local theater showing the Brit stuff, and I had one art critic who just loved the work. And I was encouraged to show the work to a professor at the university at Buffalo. And I showed it to him, and he loved the work. And he convinced me that I should enroll at the university for a master's degree, ensuring me that after 2 years, I would have a degree which would allow me to teach, and this would allow me, a profession and a career. So kind of talked me into it. I thought, okay, I wasn't really thinking sticking around Buffalo that long, but I thought, okay, 2 years, I can do that. And as soon as I turned up to enroll the first day of school, I found out that he had buggered off to California. Professor left in his wake, absolutely hated my work.
What's interesting is your time back in America, even now in Las Vegas. You've never really gone back to documenting street photography, have you?
I did one project for my master's degree thesis show because it was The river wasn't wide enough to turn the cart around. It was too soon for me to completely change my working mode. So I did one last black and white project for my thesis show, which was called Main Street. And, it turned out great. And I got, an A, and I got my degree. But, getting through those 2 years was extremely painful.
You've never really pursued it the real way you pursued it in England, isn't it?
I'd be laughed out of town. I mean, they laughed at me for doing the Main Street. They literally laughed at me because black and white documentary work was so taboo in the art world. In what was fashionable at the time was setting up little vignettes in your studio and shooting that. That was hip. That was hot. But they did not want reality. No, reality was a taboo.
And you changed your practice then, didn't you? You stayed in education, and you pursued, you've sort of taken it on another level with your media, your multimedia work and your photography and stuff. You've used it on another way. And how did Cafe Royal Books come about then? Because this is what, 25 years, 30 years later?
Yeah, I've been talking to Paul about what I can do to find a publisher, because I saw that there was a renewed interest in these vintage 70s images. He told me about Cafe Royal Books. So I shot over some images, emailed Craig some images, and, it was no problem. Sure. And the reason I went with Cafe Royal Books, this is funny. He told me about Cafe Royal Books. I looked at it, and then I'm thinking, well, I'll get one and see what it's like. I'll buy one. So I bought one just to look at the quality and paper and everything. I got one and I thought, okay, this isn't bad. And then I saw that Martin Parr had a Cafe Royal Books. And I thought, well, if it's good enough for Martin Parr, it's good enough for me.
It's good enough for Martin Parr. It's good enough for you. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that was it, and now I've got 5 books, and I'm working on a 6th right now of images that don't have any people in them.
Yeah, it's great feeling. It slots in really nicely to a lot of the stuff they've done from that period, because Cafe was giving photographers who were shooting in that period a voice, and we're going to look back at that and we're going to see how many people were actually taking pictures then.
Yeah.
The world's changed, and with people like Craig running Cafe Royals and Blue Coat Press and lots of other small independent publishers now, and Another Place Press, there's a real outlet now for people's creativity. We're starting to educate each other as well about each other, and I find it really fascinating period. It's amazing that work like yours gets out there, and that really fascinated me when I sort of looked at the work, and then I looked at who you were as an artist. And I was thinking, wow, what an interesting period of Diane's life. What's the next installment with Cafe Royal Books? What is it under Cafe Royal Top Secret Embargo? What are you working on with them now?
I'm going back through my negatives from my time in the UK, and I'm looking for that kind of Ralph Gibson inspired compositions. And, I don't know if it's enough for Cafe Royal Books to do a whole book, but I'm curious to go back and pull out photographs that are not people.
Keep me informed on that, and I look forward to that. And just want to say, Diane, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I was so fascinated by your story, the way you took that period of your life out and educated yourself through photography on another culture. I just found it really fascinating, and especially the format and the medium you were shooting on, black and white. I wanted to find out what it was about and what it was like for you. And thank you for taking the time to just give us some insight into your life. And thank you very much. It was a real pleasure talking to you, and thank you for the insight. And I can't wait to come to Vegas.
Yeah, no, it'll be fun. You should come, and thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Have a lovely weekend in Vegas. Enjoy the sun. It's 2 degrees here.
Yeah, 20 here.
Have a lovely weekend, Diane. All the best.